When I launched this show, I promised to cancel our insidious cancel culture. The usual suspects sneered. Cancel culture is fake, they said. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the real world. It's a populist argument. I see and hear it every day. Cancel culture is not real, said Time magazine. CNN thinks it's time to cancel this talk of cancel culture. The New Statesman rasps that cancel culture does not exist. But it does exist. Apart from anything else, I wouldn't be doing this show if cancel culture didn't exist. It's everywhere. It's the creeping fear now stalking all of us that we're only ever one mistake away, or a perceived mistake away, from a scandal that can end your career. Acting legend Rupert Everett's coming up later in the show. Earlier today, he described it perfectly.
Nowadays, I'm absolutely terrified every time I have to do an interview. I come out in hives and I never, ever dare read them because it's so scary. You know, you can't really, you have to be so careful what you say. You can't really just chat and have a lively discussion with someone. You always have to watch what you're saying. And I find that it's very alien to me because I've spent my life really having a lovely time with journalists and chatting about everything. And now that's a little more complicated.
How sad. How pathetic, frankly, that society has taken this turn. And it's no longer just celebrities or public figures who need to be afraid. Take Colonel Kelvin Wright, who's a bit of a British hero. As a reservist army medic, he ran the emergency department at Camp Bastion in Afghanistan. He flew in Chinook helicopters across enemy lines to rescue soldiers and civilians suffering the gruesome injuries of war. He saved many, many lives over 14 years of service. But then Colonel Kelvin got cancelled, forced out of the British Army. His crime? It was to share a social media post by a women's rights campaigner called Helen Joyce. And all it said was, if women cannot stand in a public place and say men cannot be women, then we do not have women's rights at all. You might agree with that statement. You might not agree with it. But last time I checked, in a democratic society, you're entitled to your opinion. And regardless, it wasn't his comment in the first place. He just shared it. But a formal complaint was, of course, made. LGBT activists dragged a colonel into a disciplinary process. A 7-page letter signed by these activists said he's supposedly anti-trans views. He hadn't expressed any anti-trans views. Had no place in the military. So he walked away. The biggest misunderstanding about cancel culture is it has to involve a celebrity being expunged from public life. And there are many examples of that happening. But the reality is we're now so used to righteous mobs throwing tantrums about other people's opinions that everybody is at risk. Employers are so afraid of being shamed for being on the wrong side of a tribal argument, they'll gladly hang you out to dry sooner than take any risk. With the damage already done, it's been revealed this week that Colonel Kelvin Wright has now been cleared of any wrongdoing by an official inquiry. But his army career is over, forced out by virtue signalling busybodies with nothing better to do, and certainly people who never did what he did in a war zone serving his country. It's a disgrace. Well, I'm joined now by Colonel Dr. Kelvin Wright. Well, great to have you, Colonel.
Yes,
I really, I come from a family with lots of military. My brother retired as a colonel after 37 years recently, and when I mentioned your story to him and told him what you'd done in Afghanistan, he said that was pretty hardcore duty, flying in on those helicopters to go and rescue people who'd been severely wounded. So thank you, first of all, for your service to your country. I don't know how many times you've been told that in recent months, but I suspect not enough, right?
Well, interesting enough, in recent months, quite a few times. I mean, I joined at the height of Afghanistan. My mission was to go and practice medicine in a war zone. I felt, as a consultant in a background of emergency medicine and intensive care, I had something to offer. And I was working in a hospital at the time where a lot of my trainees were military, and I felt it was time for me to do my bit. So it's one of the proudest times, and there's no way that I'm going to let these events overshadow what, as I say, is the proudest medicine I've probably ever done in my time.
The most inexplicable part of your story is not that a bunch of LGBTQ2+, the name gets longer by the minute, that these activists tried to cancel you over reposting a quote which many would agree with, certainly from a biological sex point of view. The most scandalous part of this is that the army went along with this, launched a formal investigation into you, told you it was specifically about the fact you'd shared this post, this other person's opinion, you had shared it. That seems to me extraordinary, that the British Army would do this to somebody like you.
Well, I mean, there's two interesting points that you allude to there, actually. The first is, of course, yesterday happened. And when this first started, and I am so grateful to the help that I've had from the Free Speech Union at a really trying time. The advice from them and having someone on the end of a phone you can just say, actually, you're okay, that's what you should be doing, was phenomenal. But this process, I said at the early stages, it makes you wonder who is running the army. Is it the Chief of the General Staff or is it Stonewall? This gender ideology and this fear of just common debate amongst professionals is absolutely drowning out our major institutions.
I mean, the irony is that people like you have served their country to safeguard free speech and freedoms.
Well, I agree. I mean, every year, I've been a commanding officer, it's a great privilege for the last 5 years, 2 as a half colonel and 3 as a full colonel. And every year as a commanding officer, we would stand in front of our troops and we would talk about the values and standards of the army, moral courage, most important, moral courage, doing the right thing, even when sometimes it's difficult around you. And that's what really gets me a little bit on this. Why did someone else higher up the chain not have the moral courage to say, actually, most of this complaint is absolutely vexatious? The person complained that 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't let them wear their pronouns on their uniform. The army has a uniform policy. That's not me, there's a uniform policy. They complained that 2 years ago, my wife, who'd actually come to do casualty makeup for us at an exercise, stated she'd like to see a man and a woman dancing on Strictly Come Dancing in the ballroom section. And apparently that shows poor family values on my part. And then there was this complaint, and those 3 elements are the key parts of the complaint. And then there was this quote, which I shared.
So it was actually even more ridiculous than we realised.
It was absolutely laughable. And the fact that no one had the moral courage to say, most of this is rubbish, this should not get to a full colonel being investigated, it should not get to someone being driven out, someone fearing for their civilian occupation, because this is the problem. This kind of stuff overreaches into other aspects of your life.
What was the tipping point for you when you said, I'm done with this?
Literally very early on, I received a phone call and I remember the words exactly. It was, you're in a lot of trouble. This has gone all the way to the top. The complainant is very well connected in the diversity network. And from that minute, I just felt there was no chance of getting a fair hearing. You just think, actually, you're going to be investigated. But within that process, I was never allowed to see the
But what were you being
complaint.
investigated really for?
I don't know. So that's the interesting point. I was never shown the complaint until after the verdict was in. So I had to make a statement on a complaint of which I had never even seen.
Which is ridiculous.
So this 7 pages, the first I saw this 7 pages was after the process was over.
Did the 7 pages make any record of your war record?
No, I mean, no, it was the 3 key points I've talked about already. And then there was just it was people just throwing mud, hoping something would, or one person throwing mud, hoping something would stick.
Are you transphobic? Do you have a problem with transgender people?
Not at all. I mean, as a doctor, I just treat everyone as I find them and as they treat me. As a human being, I treat everyone as they treat me. As a commanding officer, I'm more interested in someone's professional skills. My patients have never said to me, excuse me, are you an LGBT doctor? They're just about, are you a doctor? Are you good at your job? And that's all I'm interested in. Absolutely not.
Is society just going slightly mad with this gender ideology stuff?
It does feel that way. I mean, when we've lost the concept of reasoned debate, we've lost the concept of, as you said, the army stands for free speech and the fact that many men and women over the years have paid a really high price for the privilege of someone's having the right to speak.
Yes.
And now we are trampling all over that. So yes, I do think society is going absolutely crazy.
You had to leave a job that you loved and you've gone back to the NHS. You're now working in another hospital in Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. How do you feel that your army career was brought to an end like this?
Well, as I said when we were just chatting, I'm not going to let these events sour what I thought were 14 really fabulous years. I met so many really good soldiers, sailors, aircrew during my time. I taught on trauma courses. It was an absolute privilege to do that with young soldiers, particularly. It was a privilege to serve and treat those patients when they were having a really bad day. So there's no way I'm going to let this spoil all of that good stuff. But it does leave a rather sour taste that after 14 years, honourable service, it's brought to a rather premature end.
In the finding, which cleared you of any wrongdoing, the final report said that your Facebook post was clearly not unlawful, although some would find it disagreeable. And when I read that, I was like, well, maybe they would, but so what?
Well,
so what? In a democratic society, I find lots of things disagreeable. I don't want people to lose their jobs over it.
Absolutely. And in a democratic society, we have the right to have two people having a heated debate, but at the end of the day, those opinions can be held. But for me, the crucial thing, and one of the things I'm really keen to this kind of conversation, is a precedent has been set now.
Yeah.
The Army has been forced to say, actually, we do have a responsibility under public sector equality duty. The Vorstatter ruling is interpreted legally. It's not interpreted how the gender champions might like it interpreted. It's written down in law how it's interpreted. And we've got that established. So future younger soldiers, sailors, aircrew, and there are multiple cases of this already going on.
Yeah.
The Free Speech Union, we've got other cases of service personnel who've fallen into this trap as well. A precedent has been set, which hopefully will protect some of them in the future.
Colonel, thank you very much indeed for coming in. You're a war hero, you're a British hero. What happened to you was a total disgrace, and I'm extremely glad you've now been cleared of any wrongdoing. You should never have been taken through this process, and the Army's loss is the NHS's gain, and I wish you all the very best for the future.